Just as my child is now almost 8 months old, I have been with you all for 6 months now, a half a year, and I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that I feel those relationships deepening, and I just really love you all. So thank you for that gift. Now, thank you. Now, something that I knew was special about you all from before I was your minister, actually, from when I was in search, is that your search team asked me what I might need when I was an incredibly pregnant person pre-candidating with you all. They did not assume what I might need. They asked me. And when we sat around in a circle for one meeting, they let me choose the chair first, and they were like, we weren't sure what would be most comfortable for you. So we have a variety of like stiff to fluffy, depending on what your need is. And that, though it sounds simple, is a really beautiful and powerful skill, right? To ask people what they need and to be prepared for a variety of options. I think this is a skill that will serve us very well as we build relationship with one another and as we build justice in our community. And I think we've seen it especially these last few weeks that have been particularly special worship services, I think, with both Janet and Misako. We have experienced a deepening of a relationship, grounding and learning from and with one another. Our relationships are the grounding for all we do, really. They ground us, our ideals and our values, our mission and our vision. For we are, as you've heard me say many times, a people of covenant. Our ministries are bound by collective action and relationship. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about my own understanding of ministry and relational justice that is very rooted in West Virginia. Now, it was in West Virginia where I really became a minister and where I served my first congregation. And similarly to how I knew in experiencing with your search team that this was going to be a good place to be, when I went and visited the people of West Virginia, I saw and experienced that they were a people who were incredibly adept at caring for one another. They knew how to take care of one another for so many other people did not even really know they existed. They took care of one another because no one else would. And I said, I need to be in formation. I need to be taught how to be a minister by these people who already know so deeply to their very bones and souls how to do life-saving, caring ministry. Now, this was a pretty big culture change for me coming from New England, right? New England and West Virginia do things quite a bit different. And one of the most practical shifts for me was that I had to add 15 minutes onto my commute time. Everything was close together, but when you see someone in West Virginia and they ask how you're doing, they want to know how you're doing and they're gonna tell you how they're doing. It's relational in the parking lot of the grocery store. It's relational in the parking lot of my apartment building. I just had to add 15 minutes onto my commute time, and you all know, well, many of you know, timeliness is not my strong suit. So this took some work. Now, it's important for me to name that part of why I was able to learn something different in West Virginia about how to be a community of caring so deeply is that West Virginia itself is an oppressed community. And those of us in oppressed communities have learned how to take care of one another, for no one else does it. Now, in our reading, Maya Angelou wrote how isolation can be found everywhere and even in wealth and privilege. And indeed, because communities of care are not always as essential for those very basic human needs, sometimes, especially in privilege, there is isolation and an unknowingness of how to create these types of communities of care and what some would call a poverty of the soul. That's a whole other sermon for another day that we'll have. But for now, it's important for us to name that more and more people are being failed by our institutions as draconian laws are passed in our cities, counties, state, and national governing bodies. Right? We see this again in laws against trans youth and adults. We see this again in voting laws that make it harder to impossible for many people of color to vote. And we see this again in networks that have had to be created once again to ensure that people who need access to a safe abortion can get one, right? We know that this time is already here and is coming in bigger ways here in our community. Janet spoke of this a few weeks ago, of how this fellowship created a safe space for trans youth when mental health issues and suicide rates were alarmingly high. This fellowship, too, knows how to be people who are taking care of other people when the need is there. This fellowship knows how to get to know one another and say, what is it that you need? And because we are all human in community, sometimes we need reminders of like, right, we do know how to do that. And that is our strength, because the time will be coming when we need to do this again and again for those of us who are here now in our fellowship and those of us who are still being brought into this beloved community. Now, though we can't be sure who those are among us who will ask us to side with them and side with love, I'm confident it will happen, as it has time and time again, and as it will continue, because our civil institutions are once again failing people, and we will be a people of presence and solidarity, of safe harbor and refuge, of transformation and growth. Can I get an amen? Amen. There we go. We will be about relationships and people. Now, a piece of wisdom from Dr. Emily Towns. She once said, I was in the room when she said this, institutions will fail you. Put your trust in people, put your trust in relationships. Now, the context of this is that Dr. Emily Towns is one of our most prominent womanist theologians in the country. She's the former dean of Vanderbilt Divinity School, and before that was the assistant dean at my alma mater, Yale Divinity School. Now, the day I heard her say those words was her very last talk to those of us at Yale Divinity School before she went off to be the dean at Vanderbilt. It was her last conversation because she was leaving, because someone else asked her to be dean after our own seminary passed her up for a less academically accomplished, less experienced and administrative, less controversial, and more conservative white man. And so she stood and ministered to a group of people who were mourning her loss after she was so wrongly treated. And she said, institutions will fail you. Put your trust in people, put your trust in relationships. Put your faith in one another, she says. Find ways to make communities that care. Always, always find ways to make communities that care. And so we are charged today to make communities of care, to be for people that we are for and against whatever evils might be coming our way. For we know how to create support, solidarity, and we are called to action and held accountable by the relationships we create in this room. Now, this is not to say that people cannot fail us. I do not think any of us in this room have not been failed by another person. People and relationships can, of course, fail us. And something that binds us together in covenant, in community, is that we are bound to come back when we fail. We agree together to turn towards one another, to do that repair work, that coming together, that making amends, that making rights, that righting relationship and making justice. And that is what makes us stronger. That is what makes us a community that can create justice both within and outside of these walls. For we know that we are human, and we know that we will mess up, and we know that we can turn back towards one another and create even stronger bonds of justice. For we have been through conflict, for we have been through fights, and we have gotten through the other side. You all have gotten through conflict and fights, and you are stronger for it. I have seen it, I have felt it, and we will continue to do so. Hopefully some different kinds of fights, right? We'll fight differently, we'll have conflict differently, and through that, we will be stronger, and we will be a place that truly can provide a safe haven and a refuge, as well as create more justice outside of our walls. Now, we've talked about how institutions can fail us. We've sort of acknowledged that it's true that even this fellowship can fail us sometimes, and has likely failed some of us. And it's my sad news to report that the fellowship will fail us again. It will be too slow to move and change for some and too quick for others. And so, right? Yes, we know this. And so in addition to centering in mission and vision, we must remember the community base is our relationships, is one another. When this institution fails us, still let us put our faith in our relationships here and invest both in their tenacity and their longevity. For what really is a fellowship? I looked this up, as we're prone to do when we're preaching sermons. And a fellow is one who shares with one another. One who shares with one another, and a fellowship is a body of companions. It is this knowing one another, truly sharing and listening to one another, that will move us into justice, that will give us the strength, the love, and the accountability to do things we would never have dreamed. So, how do we begin this work? Simple, very truly. And you all are actually pretty good at doing this, as judged by how I have to cut you all off during the meet and greet time. Say hello to someone and really ask how they are doing. Call, email, set up a time to get to know one another within this fellowship first. Talk with someone you don't know. Talk with someone who has a different identity than you. Become fellows, those who share with one another. Do this even if it makes you 15 minutes late, right? For this is how we build the relationships that have changed us. I know this because it's been true for me, and so I leave you with one final closing story from my time in West Virginia. On June 26, 2017, a fairly awkward, very new, not even officially ordained minister, myself, got arrested in Senator Shelley Moore Capito's office in support of the Affordable Care Act. Now, the Affordable Care Act was attempted to be totally dismantled, and the people of West Virginia disproportionately gained a whole lot from the Affordable Care Act. So many folks in West Virginia were able to receive health insurance and health care because they were on that, because of the Affordable Care Act. Now, I have a tendency to be slightly anxious, and I really didn't want to have to get arrested. And this was also happening right after General Assembly, which was like kind of a tiring, exhausting week long of events. It's our denomination's annual gathering for ministers. And so I almost said no, but I was asked by a community of people who I trusted and who trusted me. And I still almost said no, but I showed up that morning to meet with those of us who were willing to risk arrest in Shelley Moore Capito's office. And people talked about why they were doing this, right? The stories, their own stories of why it was important for them to make this risk and to try to bring attention, to try to get our senator to do the right thing and to save people in our state from losing so much health care. And the person that came into my mind was a man, we'll call him Bob, from my congregation, who was a middle-aged, and I mean like solidly middle-aged, like 40s, 50s guy, and he was a single dad. And I knew that he had been unable to afford a surgery on his leg that was just making it really hard to live and work and raise his incredibly energetic and wonderful daughter. He was struggling so much and working so hard and saving up to be able to afford this surgery, and this was with the Affordable Care Act in effect. And so as I sat there very truly terrified and really not wanting to get arrested, I kept thinking about Bob and about how different his life would be if the Affordable Care Act went away, and so many other people. And it was Bob, right? It was my relationship with Bob and knowing his story that made it so that I had to say yes that day, and I had to take a risk. This was not an action I really would have imagined myself taking in other ways, right? Despite standing up in front of you week after week, I'm like not really a limelight kind of person. But I was a minister, and there is a strategic element of having a minister be arrested for something like healthcare, right? And so for Bob and for so many other people, I said yes. So this is my hope for all of us, that we might get to know one another's stories, that we might be moved by one another's stories, and that the bond of love and care that we feel will enable and inspire us to take action we never would have dreamed it possible for us to take. For this is the kind of transformation that can happen in relationship and community. So let's start now. Say yes if someone asks you to really get to know you a bit better, and ask someone else to get to know them. Give someone a call or an email, set up an appointment, and let's get to know one another. For the times are coming when we will need to be building some communities of care that hold one another in safety and love, and that build that world we dream about, not just inside of these walls, but outside as well. Amen. May it be so, and may we make it so.